June 25th, 1876, the day the 7th Cavalry marched into hell. As arrows and bullets rained down, Custer's doomed soldiers knew they wouldn't survive. But before the last man fell, some left behind eerie final words scratched into canteens, scribbled on scraps of paper, or gasped to their brothers in arms. These weren't just messages, they were confessions of terror, regret, and unimaginable despair. Why were some of these dying words hidden for decades? And what did one soldier's last whisper reveal about Custer's fatal mistake? Tonight we break the silence. These are the lost voices of the Little Bighorn, and their stories will follow you long after this video ends. Stick with me to the end, because what you're about to hear will change how you see Custer's last stand forever. But before we continue, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Sunday, June 25th. Near noon, we crossed the high ground dividing the Rosebud and Little Bighorn rivers. The regiment pressed forward in a marching column, companies arranged 4 abreast, with gaps of roughly 50 to 60 feet separating each unit. Abruptly, we halted. Lieutenant Cook instructed Benteen to take Company H, reinforced by D Company, Captain Weir, and K Company, Lieutenant Godfrey, to scout the hills and engage any enemy forces. Meanwhile, General Custer retained command of Troops F, C, and L, while Major Reno led Troops M, A, and C, accompanied by the bulk of the Indian Scouts under Lieutenants Varnum and Hare. Our 600-man 7th Cavalry had fractured into smaller detachments, pursuing native warriors across unforgiving ground. We knew a sizable hostile force lay 12 to 15 miles west, though their numbers were uncertain. Our scouts reported thousands of warriors, but Custer and his officers dismissed this, estimating no more than 1,500, likely ill-equipped. They expected a brief clash before the enemy dispersed. Instead, we faced a force perhaps double our estimates, outmatching Custer's 600 men fivefold. Originally planning a dawn attack on June 26th, Custer altered course after enemy scouts detected our approach. Benteen advanced with 3 troops to survey the area. The rugged landscape slowed our horses, straining the column. From each hill, Lieutenant Gibson signaled the same: no sign of hostiles. Even the enlisted men grew convinced the mission was futile. After 2 hours, we wheeled back toward Custer's trail, relieved to re-enter the sheltered valley. Moving west along a thin creek, the lead mules became mired in a swamp, revealing the pack train's sluggishness. As we pressed on, distant gunfire crackled ahead. Captain Weir's company took the lead, with Benteen riding farther forward. Every soldier sensed combat was near. Shortly after escaping the mire, we passed a smoldering teepee, likely set ablaze by our scouts. The horses grew uneasy, their nostrils flaring at the scent of blood and powder. Then Sergeant Knipe from Tom Custer's C Troop appeared, relaying urgent orders to Captain McDougal about hastening the pack mules. Benteen swiftly sent him back down the trail. Moments later, Trumpeter Martini, wounded but resolute, arrived bearing Custer's demand for Benteen to rush the supplies forward. Martini, a fiery Italian who'd once marched with Garibaldi in Italy's Wars of Liberation, was familiar to me as an H Troop member. The men often ribbed him good-naturedly, though none jested after that day's ordeal. He'd proven himself unbreakable. His horse bled profusely from a bullet wound, yet Martini seemed oblivious. Benteen ordered him back to his unit. I suspect Benteen saw no need to send another messenger, as Knipe had already delivered the pack train directive. Martini's exhausted steed struggled to keep up as gunfire swelled. Soon we encountered Crow and Ree-scouts driving captured ponies, shouting warnings, and gesturing frantically toward the northern bluffs. We realized we were nearing the Little Bighorn Valley, where brutal fighting had erupted. Benteen barked orders to draw pistols, and we urged our horses uphill, bracing for battle. Cresting the ridge, the river valley unfolded below us to the left. The sight would have frozen the bravest soldier's veins. Some 150 feet down, half a mile distant, horsemen surged through gun smoke amid relentless rifle fire. Farther along the river, shadowy masses of warriors moved like specters, clearly the enemy forces. Our horses galloped at full tilt when we spotted soldiers, mounted and dismounted, forming a defensive position on a northern hill. We raced toward them, hearts pounding with every stride. Before continuing, let me recount what had befallen Reno's men earlier that day. Around 12:15 p.m., Major Reno took charge of 3 cavalry troops, 17 Crow and Ree scouts, and 3 white guides. While Custer maneuvered 5 troops to the right flank, Reno's column pushed leftward. Captain Bentine's detachment, 3 troops, mine among them, was ordered to scout the broken southern and western bluffs, keeping us from the heart of the action during the decisive hours that followed. Though I didn't see these events unfold myself, the survivors' accounts have been seared into my memory, and I'll relate them as plainly as I can. The 2 battalions moved through the parched creek bed, at times passing within 50 yards of one another, then diverging by 200 yards or more. The uneven ground forced their paths to weave unpredictably as they advanced toward what would soon become a battlefield etched in infamy. The twin cavalry columns pushed west toward the Little Bighorn. Near 2 o'clock, they came upon a still smoldering teepee containing the body of a warrior killed in General Crook's clash with the Sioux just a week prior and fewer than 20 miles away. A white scout riding point suddenly wheeled his horse and shouted to Custer that hostile warriors were tracking their movements, keeping just beyond rifle range. With swift resolve, Custer signaled Reno to ford the stream, while Adjutant Cook delivered the fateful orders. Reno was to advance 2 miles farther west along the Little Bighorn before charging the Indian village to the right, with the promise that the entire regiment would back his assault. This final assurance of reinforcements would later fuel endless debate about the disaster that ensued. Reno's detachment, 120 troopers, a handful of scouts and guides, crossed the Little Bighorn at a steady trot. They paused briefly to let their horses drink from the clear, gravel-bottomed stream before reforming battle lines on the far bank. Before them lay a wide valley, sloping gently upward for half a mile before rising to a low plateau. Behind, the Wolf Mountain's jagged slopes tumbled down through ravines to the river's edge. The river itself, 100 to 150 feet across and crystal clear, separated the cavalry from their impending battleground. Along 3 miles of the western shore sprawled one of the largest gatherings of Indians ever seen on the plains, concentric rings of lodges representing 5 Sioux tribes, Cheyenne, Blackfeet, and Arapaho, each band maintaining its own village about a quarter-mile apart. Beyond the teepees, thousands of ponies grazed under the watchful eyes of women and children. Historians now believe nearly 10,000 Native Americans had assembled here, roughly a third of all Sioux people, including 2,000 to 3,000 hardened warriors ready to defend their families and way of life. Let me correct a common misconception about their arms. The popular notion of every warrior brandishing a new Winchester and belts stuffed with cartridges is pure myth. From what I observed, barely half carried proper firearms at all. A good number fought with traditional weapons, well-worn bows and quivers full of arrows, lances passed down through generations. Of those with guns, perhaps half relied on outdated muzzle loaders, single-shot relics, and an assortment of firearms in dubious condition. The truth? Only 1 in 4 warriors had those dreaded repeating rifles. Another oft-overlooked fact: boys as young as 14 fought alongside their elders, especially as the battle dragged into its later stages. Our men, meanwhile, carried the single-shot Springfield carbine, .45-70 caliber, deadly accurate at 600 yards when handled right. But under rapid fire, these weapons turned traitor. The breech fouled, and those damned government-lubricated copper cartridges swelled and jammed. More than 1 good soldier died that day trying to pry a stuck shell loose with his knife while bullets flew. As sidearms, Each cavalryman had the new Colt Army revolver, a reliable six-shooter when the carbines failed. The irony wasn't lost on us. While the hostiles lacked standardized arms, their weapons never jammed at the worst possible moment. Unlike ours, each soldier had been issued 100 rifle rounds and 24 pistol cartridges, carried on their person or in saddlebags. But when every fourth man was detailed as a horseholder, chaos erupted as spooked mounts stampeded, taking with them thousands of rounds Custer's battalion would later need desperately. Now to Reno's advance, after crossing the river, his battalion formed columns of fours, scouts fanning out to the left. Almost immediately, warriors appeared, galloping wildly across the valley as the southern edge of the massive village came into view. Reno swiftly deployed his troops, M on the right, a center, G left, into a skirmish line spanning the valley's width, with scouts screening ahead. The major ordered his men to dismount, spacing them 75 yards apart. They advanced half a mile toward the village before a swarm of mounted warriors descended. For 10 minutes, Reno's troopers held firm, delivering disciplined volleys, but they were soon engulfed as hundreds of Indians, many armed with repeaters, closed in from all sides. Seeing encirclement looming, Reno called for a fighting retreat. His men remounted in good order and fell back 300 yards, only to meet another wave of warriors. They hastily reformed their skirmish line, dismounted again, and resumed fire. But the situation grew dire. The air roared with hooves, war cries, and gunfire as the outnumbered soldiers struggled against the onslaught. For 10 brutal minutes, Reno's line held, but the warriors pressed closer with each volley, their bullets striking with deadly precision. Facing annihilation, Reno bellowed the order to retreat to a cottonwood grove half a mile back. What began as an orderly withdrawal shattered into bedlam. Horses panicked, companies broke apart, and men ran blindly through smoke and gunfire. The retreat turned into a bloodbath. Warriors descended like hawks on stragglers, dragging men from their mounts, crushing skulls with stone clubs, and taking trophies from the dead. The river became a killing ground, with 15 to 20 soldiers cut down in the shallows or along the banks. Those who survived the gauntlet clawed their way up the steep eastern bluffs, where miraculously their pursuers suddenly halted the chase. At this desperate hour, near 2:30 p.m., hope flickered to life as Captain Weir's D Troop materialized through the dust, closely followed by Benteen's H and K troops. Though Reno's shattered force barely resembled a fighting unit, these reinforcements provided a lifeline. Benteen, the battle-hardened professional, immediately organized defensive positions. Their numbers swelled when McDougall's B Troop arrived with the vital pack train, those ammunition-laden mules representing the thin line between survival and slaughter. While these survivors fortified their hilltop refuge, Custer and his 5 troops had ridden into legend. Advancing north along the bluffs, they made their fatal discovery near what's now the National Cemetery. Not a vulnerable camp, but a swirling tide of warriors. The final moments of Custer's battalion would become the stuff of myth, even as Reno and Benteen's men clung to life on their bloody ridge. Custer's men, disciplined and defiant to the end, stood little chance against the encircling waves of warriors. Despite desperate resistance, their lines crumbled under the relentless assault. By dusk, not one soldier from Custer's 5 companies remained alive. Each had fought until his last breath. From their precarious hilltop position, Reno and Benteen's men listened to the distant gunfire fade, their stomachs heavy with dreadful certainty. The night passed in exhausted vigilance, broken by occasional skirmishes as warriors tested their defenses. At daybreak, the victorious Indian forces began melting away from the valley. When General Terry's column arrived 2 days later, they found broken men where a regiment had stood. The Battle of Little Bighorn had already cemented its place as the Army's most crushing defeat on the plains. Yet the testimony of survivors like Charles Windolph ensures the valor and sacrifice of that day endure. This eyewitness account forces us to confront the brutal truth of the Great Sioux War, a conflict that forever altered the American West. Charles Windolph carried these nightmares to his grave, but his testimony leaves us with an unsettling thought. What if Custer had disobeyed orders? What if Reno had pressed the attack instead of falling back? Could a single different choice have changed everything? The Army buried its dead and its blunders. The survivors traded accusations. But I ask you, who truly bears responsibility for this disaster? Was it hubris, faulty intelligence, or something more sinister? Share your verdict in the comments. Join us next time as we delve deeper into history's most decisive battles. Until then, remember, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. Subscribe now.